Mara Ellison had never been inside a palace before. She had spent most of her life in a small town in Canada, surrounded by pine trees, gravel roads, and the kind of quiet that most people either love or leave. She was the kind of woman who wore hiking boots to meetings and forgot to brush her hair when she was thinking about something important. She was not the kind of woman who belonged in a palace. But there she was. The Kingdom of Valdoria was not a large country. Most people had never heard of it. It sat high in the Alps, tucked between two mountains, with clean rivers and old stone buildings, and a royal family that had ruled there for 600 years. It was the kind of place that tourists sometimes stumbled into by accident, and then told everyone about for the rest of their lives. Mara had not stumbled in. She had been invited, as part of a small international team of conservationists, scientists, and environmental researchers. Valdoria's forests were disappearing. The rivers were changing. Someone in the government had finally decided to do something about it, and they had brought in outside experts to help. The summit was 3 days long. On the first morning, Mara arrived at the palace hall 2 hours early. She did this because she was nervous, and being early was the only thing that made her feel less nervous. She carried 2 heavy bags, one full of printed reports, one full of equipment for her presentation, and she was already tired from the flight. She had not slept well. She had eaten a granola bar on the plane and nothing since. The throne room was enormous, and almost completely dark when she walked in. A single row of tall windows let in a pale gray morning light. The ceiling was painted with clouds and gold. The floor was made of white marble that clicked under her boots. Rows of chairs were arranged in long arcs facing a raised platform at the far end of the room. At the center of that platform stood a chair. It was not a small chair. It was tall and wide, with dark carved wood and a cushioned seat. It looked old. It looked important. But in the dim light of the empty room, it simply looked like a chair, and Mara's bags were heavy, and her back was hurting, and the nearest seat she could see was that one. She walked up to it. She set her bags on the floor. She sat down. She pulled out her notes and began to read through them. She ate the second granola bar she had been saving in her jacket pocket. She was still reading when the doors opened. The sound came first, a low, deep sound of hinges, and then footsteps, many of them, all at once. Then light flooded the room, as the high double doors were pushed wide open, and the royal court of Valdoria walked in. Mara looked up. There were perhaps 200 people. They were dressed in formal clothes, with medals and sashes, and the kind of shoes that had never walked on gravel. They moved quickly, efficiently, in a practiced way, as though they had done this walk 100 times. Several of them were already speaking to one another in low voices. A group of foreign dignitaries near the back were being translated to by 2 separate interpreters. And then every single one of them stopped. The room went completely silent. Mara looked around. She looked at the 200 people staring at her. She looked at the guards near the door, who had put their hands on their weapons without drawing them. She looked at the old man in the dark formal coat near the front, the court chamberlain she would later learn, who had gone so pale that his face looked like the marble floor. She looked down at the granola bar wrapper that was sitting on the armrest. She looked at the chair she was sitting in. "Is this," she said, very slowly, "not a chair?" Nobody answered. No one in the room seemed to be breathing. Then the doors opened again. He did not walk the way she expected a king to walk. She had a picture in her head from films and history books. Someone stiff. Someone who moved as though the air itself was arranged for them. King Aldrich Voss walked the way a man walks when he has somewhere to be and is not particularly worried about who is watching. He was tall, with dark hair that was just beginning to go gray at the sides, and a face that showed nothing easily. He wore a formal jacket, but no crown. He did not need one. He stepped into the room and stopped. His eyes moved across the scene the way a person's eyes move when they are reading a page quickly and looking for the sentence that matters. The silent court. The horrified chamberlain. The guards who did not know what to do with their hands. The foreign dignitaries frozen mid-translation. And then his eyes found her. A woman in hiking boots, sitting on the throne of Valdoria, holding a granola bar wrapper. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression did not change. And then, slowly, it did. He smiled. It was not the smile a person performs for a photograph. It was the smile that arrives on a person's face before they have decided to let it, the kind that belongs only to genuine surprise. It was quiet and small and entirely real. He walked forward across the marble floor. The crowd parted in front of him without being asked. He stopped a few feet from the platform and looked up at her with an expression that was impossible to read, except for the fact that it was not angry. When he spoke loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "You are the first person in 300 years," he said, "to sit in that chair and look completely unbothered by it. That is either the bravest thing I have ever seen in this hall, or the most honest, possibly both." He paused. "Welcome to Valdoria. The throne, apparently, approves of you." The room made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur, something between the two. The chamberlain reached out and steadied himself on the arm of a nearby chair. Two elderly lords exchanged a look of complete disbelief. A young attendant near the back pressed her lips together very hard to keep from laughing. Mara stood up slowly. She picked up the granola bar wrapper. She folded it once and put it in her pocket. "I am very sorry," she said. "I thought it was a prop." Aldrich looked at her for just a moment. "Most of the people in this room are," he said. She expected him to forget about her after that. She expected to give her presentation, shake some hands, and go home. That was how these things worked. That was not how this worked. He listened to her presentation, not in the polite way that officials usually listen, with their eyes steady and their minds somewhere else, but in the actual way, the kind where a person leans forward slightly and asks questions that prove they heard what you said. He pushed back on 2 of her numbers. He asked her to explain her methodology for calculating forest loss over the past decade. When she answered, he asked a follow-up question that showed he had read the pre-submitted reports more carefully than anyone else at the table. She was so surprised that she forgot, briefly, to be nervous. That evening, the delegation was housed in a wing of the palace guest quarters. Mara could not sleep. At nearly midnight she wrapped herself in a coat and wandered down a corridor in search of water, took a wrong turn, and ended up in a long room lined with books. He was already there. He was sitting in a chair near one of the windows with a lamp and a book, and no particular expression on his face. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "I got lost," she said. "There is water on the table by the door," he said. She got the water. She did not leave immediately. There was something about the room, the smell of old paper, the quiet, that made leaving feel unnecessary. They talked, about the forests first, then about the rivers, then about a bird she had spent 2 years studying in British Columbia, and about a river he had visited as a child in the northern part of his country that had been twice as wide then as it was now. They talked the way 2 people talk when they are both interested in the same thing and have not spoken to anyone who understands it in a long time. She left at 1:30 and slept better than she had in weeks. The next morning, at a long formal breakfast with 12 people she barely knew, he quietly switched his fork with hers when she picked up the wrong one for the second course. He did it so naturally that no one noticed. She noticed. She did not say anything. Neither did he. That afternoon, in a closed-door session with 6 government ministers, one of them presented a figure about carbon absorption that was wrong. Not slightly wrong, significantly wrong. Wrong in a way that would have changed the policy recommendation entirely. Mara said so. The minister was not pleased. She explained her reasoning calmly, clearly, and without apology, citing 3 separate sources she had memorized because she had not expected to need them, but always prepared as though she might. The room shifted. The other ministers began asking her questions instead of the minister. By the end of the session, the figure had been corrected and the recommendation had changed. Aldrich had not spoken during any of it, but afterward, in the corridor, he fell briefly into step beside her. "You were right," he said. "I know," she said. He smiled again, the real one. "Good," he said. On the 3rd day, one of the senior lords found her alone near the gardens before the closing ceremony. He was polite about it. That made it worse somehow, he explained, in a pleasant and measured voice, that Valdoria appreciated the work of the delegation, that outside perspectives were always valuable, and that he was sure she understood the importance of letting the kingdom conduct its affairs through the appropriate channels. He said that certain irregularities in the week's proceedings had been noted. He said that people who came without titles were welcomed as guests, not as advisors. Mara listened to all of it. "I came here for the forests," she said, when he had finished. "Not the politics. I'll finish what I came to do." He left. She stayed by the garden wall for a moment, looking at the mountains. The closing ceremony was formal and long. The king addressed the full court and the delegation together. He spoke about the history of the kingdom, about responsibility, about the land. His speech was prepared. It had been written by the chamberlain and approved 2 weeks earlier. He departed from it halfway through. He said that the kingdom was formally adopting a version of the conservation framework the team had proposed, adjusted, modified, made specific to Valdoria's terrain and needs, but built on the foundation of the research they had brought. He named the framework. He named the organization that had produced it. He named Mara, in front of 200 people, in a room where that had not been done before, not for an outsider, not for someone who arrived with no title and left for home at the end of the week. Then he said something that was not in any draft the chamberlain had written. 300 years ago, he said, the throne of this kingdom was made to hold the weight of difficult decisions. It has been empty more often than it should have been. This week reminded this court that the chair does not give a person authority. Conviction does. I am grateful that someone had the nerve to sit down. The applause was not immediate. There was a pause, a real one, with some tension in it, and then it came, and it was genuine. Mara, in the back row of the delegation section, looked at her notes and took a very slow breath. She went home 3 days later. The framework was implemented over the following 18 months. Valdoria became the first sovereign mountain territory in that part of Europe to achieve full protected forest status under the new international accord. Mara's organization was listed as a founding partner in the official documents. Her name appeared in 3 government publications, which she found out about by accident when a colleague forwarded her a photograph of one. She and the king corresponded through official channels for 4 months. Then the correspondence became less official. Then it became frequent. 2 years after the summit, she returned to Valdoria. This time she was invited as a guest of the crown to speak at the first major ecological summit Aldrich had hosted under his new conservation policy. She flew in on a Tuesday morning and was met at the airport by a palace car and a driver who did not make conversation, which she appreciated. She walked into the throne room on Wednesday. She knew the room now. She knew exactly which chair was which. She walked to the front of the hall and sat down in the chair that had been placed to the right of the throne. It was new. The wood was lighter. The cushion was a different color. A small brass plate was fixed to the back of it, the kind of plate that named a chair at a table, the kind that said, "This seat belongs to this person." It read, Ellison. The chamberlain stood nearby. He had not spoken to her directly in 2 years. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. He said nothing, but he did not look displeased. The story spread the way small true stories do, passed between people who had been in the room that first morning, told and retold, until some of the details changed, and some of them sharpened. Most people preferred the simple version. A woman sat in the wrong chair. A king chose to find that extraordinary. A kingdom was better for it. It is a true story, which is the best kind. And somewhere in the foothills of Valdoria, the forests are growing back.